This morning, from the horse box, I am talking to Marcus Armytage, Grand National winning jockey on Mr. Frisk in 1990 and the Daily Telegraph's racing correspondent. Good morning, Marcus.
Good morning.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
And thank you. Yeah, I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Now, that's a very brief introduction because there is so much more. I'm very lucky to catch you between fixtures, the Derby and Royal Ascot recently. Do you ever get a breather?
Yeah, there's not much now. July meeting's the next, and then Goodwood. So there's a bit of a gap in between the two. I mean, something like the July meeting now probably doesn't capture my sports editor's imagination like it probably did 20 years ago, or more so even 40 years ago.
So winning the Grand National in 1990 on Mr. Frisk, haven't you? Does it feel like you've joined a sort of club in a circle?
I think there probably is. I mean, I have said to a few subsequent winning jockeys, welcome to the club. Yeah, and I suppose because I was an amateur, there's an even smaller sub-club of amateurs who've won it. Most recently, Sam Whaley-Cohen, of course. He was the sixth since the war, so and getting fewer. In the early days, amateurs won it often as the professionals, but things have changed, and these days amateurs struggle to get a ride in it, to be quite honest.
And also the fastest track record, you and Mr. Frisk. I wondered if you could just sort of pick out something in the race. I know the winning line.
Well, I guess it wasn't at the time, but to break a track record, if someone breaks a world record in athletics over a distance, not sprinters, but over any sort of distance, 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters marathon, they need a pacemaker. And so someone to take them along without them having to do what I'd call the donkey work. And in 1990, there was a Maryland Hunt Cup winner called Uncle Merlin in it, trained by Tim Forster, who'd already won 3 nationals, I think. He was a fast ground specialist, and he went, and Huell Davis, who really was my mentor, was riding him, and he just went flat to the mat the whole way. And there was there were, a few things, but one was setting out on the second circuit. I just tried. I mean, the horses got racing a bit towards the chair, and Huell had asked me to sort of drop off, which I was quite happy to do because both horses were doing far too much, really, and it wasn't ultimately it wasn't going to help me too much if the horses were taking on each other. So I did drop off a bit, but going to the sort of first, or the second or third on the second circuit, I thought I'll just see if I can get sort of level with him, and I couldn't because he was going so fast. And then I guess the pivotal moment of the race, although I had no idea at the time, was when he just the horse crossed his legs a little bit at the chair, and when I went past Huell, he was on the horse's ears, and I was pretty confident Huell would be back in the saddle and would join me probably again at the canal turn. But I know, obviously he didn't. He went over the horse's head eventually, and I mean, I had no idea what was with me, but Uncle Merlin, I never saw again. I'm not confident I would have won if he'd stood up. I must say, there's still a long way to go, and Mr. Frisk stayed it well, did it in a very good time, and held off Durham Edition late on. But that was obviously for me the key moment of the race, was Beecher's second time when Uncle Merlin went.
Which fence gave you the biggest thrill to jump? Those fences were different than they are now.
Back in those days, I remember the first time going around there, just how much longer you were in the air, like hanging there, because of the drops, the size, and B, the drop. You felt almost like you were in the air for seconds. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't seconds. It was probably but compared to normal fences, the horse had to make a different sort of shape. You try and get into this sort of rhythm of slipping your reins a lot more than you would on a park course, and then gathering them up, like sort of doing your knitting and then getting set for the next one. Before the race, I was always worried about the first fence because it does catch out the really good jumpers sometimes. Getting over the first was quite a thrill because I thought if there was one fence Mr. Frisk was just going to be too exuberant at, it would be the first. Otherwise, I didn't really have too many worries with the jumping.
Yeah, Mr. Frisk must hold very special memories for you.
Yeah, no. So he was unlucky. Tracy Bailey had him in retirement, and he slipped over the road and broke his leg.
Animals, that's what happens, sometimes, isn't it? After the Grand National, you were interviewed many times, and then the final interviewer asked you if you'd like to ride in Russia.
Yeah, so we had the last guy on, he waited so patiently, and all I wanted to do was get home because I think the adrenaline had started to run out by 6 o'clock. I mean, the race was probably run at 3:30 then, and I'd had one more ride in an amateur race, and then to do all these television things and sports report. And he was the last one, and he said, "Have you ever wanted to ride in Russia?" And I said, "I've always dreamt of riding in Russia, more than anything to get rid of him." And actually, he became quite a good friend. He was called Mahmoud Tokov, and he lived in the sort of North Caucasus area of southern Russia.
This was a completely different experience.
Yeah, so this was just take a little team of jockeys out there, and Andy Orkney and Simon McNeil, who were two great friends of mine. So we had to fly to a place called Pyatigorsk, which is about 3 hours south of Moscow, because at the time Russia was it was Gorbachev and it was Glasnost. So we went back a few years later, and every time we went, they had this. One of the fences was, they didn't mow the track, so there was long grass, and there was a dirt track around the outside for the flat racing, but they didn't really pay much attention to the jumpers. And there was a log which was so small, it was about a foot high in the long grass, which the horse couldn't really see, and going that pace would step at it, and we thought it was an accident waiting to happen. So when we went back in 92, I think it was, they rebuilt this fence especially for us, but they hadn't schooled the horses over it, and it was about 3.5 foot, and it was solid, and every other fence on the course was, you could walk through, they were that soft. When we were walking the course, because it was in a far corner, it was a very hot day, we didn't even go and look at it. And in the race, I think 9 horses fell individually at this fence, and the ground was pretty hard, so I had a massive hematoma on my knee. Luke Harvey broke his collarbone. Carl Llewellyn, he just won the national on party politics, just got rolled on, and subsequently his sort of body went into shock and started shutting down, which really put the shit on me, because I could see him sort of like closing down in front of us. Anyway, the doctors were very good, got him to hospital, but we had to push the ambulance to get it started and all that sort of, but the doctors knew what they were doing. They were, they 10 minutes on him and he was fine, sort of fine again, but he was very sore for a few days. That was the end of our little rush. The thing about race riding is I feel like I could go to any country practically in the world, someone would take me in and put me up, because that is racing. It's a sort of community that it crosses borders and language, horses full stop. But if I go to Italy and went to Murano or something, which I did a few times, I could go and find someone who would be a kindred spirit and who would, if I was in any sort of trouble, look after me. I have no doubt, and pretty much any country in the world would do that.
You were also in the Grand National that never was, weren't you, in 1993? What happened to you in that race?
So I was on a horse called Travel Over, which was owned by William Haggis's mum for Richard Lee. There were a couple of things that I think were perfect storm sort of situation, which it was. A couple of things. One was it was wet and cold and miserable, and in those days 9/10 of the jockeys were doing their absolute minimum weight to ride in it. So I mean, I don't even think body protectors were compulsory then. So maybe they were, but so we'd have at most had a body protector and a thin pair of silks, and your lightest breeches. And so everyone was really cold, and there was a delay, and you could just come out of a sauna. That's the other thing. Okay, so you get cold very quickly. So I think that added to everyone's sort of impatience, on top of which you're excited because, for one person, that's about, they're about to have their biggest moment of their lives. So there's that sort of anticipation as well. And then it was delayed probably 10 minutes by protesters, and then a full start. And the second time, everyone was so pissed off. And I could just, when they went the second time, and that I couldn't because the horse had starting tape around its legs. But one horse's nose, I mean, it's a very small margin. One horse's nose catches the tape and the tape just disintegrates. It didn't detract ever from, I didn't think, from the Nationals sort of story and history, and probably added to it in a funny sort of way.
Yeah.
And so I was basically stuck with my wheels spinning but not able to go anywhere. And the tape was around Richard Dunwoody's neck beside me. And every time I took a step forward, it pulled tight on his neck.
So you knew the race was void, but most jockeys didn't.
Yeah, but I knew the race was. I didn't know the race was void. I knew it was a full start, and I knew also that the others weren't coming back, because I could just see from their body language, even from behind, that they were set and nothing was going to stop them.
No.
And you can see that in people's body language. You don't have to be an expert in that. I just knew they were set, they were not coming back. And they took a lot of stopping.
So other races in the world, besides the Russian one was a different one altogether, but this race in the Czech Republic, the Pardubicka, how does that compare with the National?
It's much slower. When I rode in it one year, I brought down there sort of a horse called Lesnick at halfway, who was there according to Red Rum, and the guy remounted and went on and won the race.
Yeah.
And I don't, in an English race, unless there's only two standing or whatever, remount, and you can't remount anyway. But in out there, then, they were going so slowly that actually he had time to A, get back on his horse, B, catch up and C, win the race. So it was much more like hunting, and it was across ploughs and big fences. And I did quite enjoy it. When I brought the winner down, it was the second year. I got round the first year and finished sixth. I did think the Taxis was probably then the biggest fence I'd ever jumped, and then fell at halfway, and that was at the smallest obstacle, but it was a solid sort of telegraph pole, about not very big, even 3 foot. And I think that year I was going quite well. It might have been a bit keen, possibly, to get home over the trip, but and then the following year was the sort of chapter at Comedy of Errors. Really, the only instructions I could remember from the Czech lady trainer, was don't be in front going to the Taxis, which is the fourth fence. And this was another race delayed a bit by protesters, and then eventually we got started, and I was at the back, and I was, because the Taxis comes early. I mean, I all I had to do was just not be in front at the Taxis. Pretty simple instructions, really. And then when we landed over the second fence and headed for the third, which was a big water, there was a full-scale riot going on in a sort of little dip in the ground between probably 40 protesters and as many police. And the police were coming from the same direction as us. So the police didn't even know we were bearing down on them, bearing down on the protesters who were sat down. And the whole race came to a standstill, except for me. And it just opened up like the Red Sea for me. So suddenly, from being nearly last, I was 10 lengths clear, with knowing that the Taxis is around the corner, and A, you need revs for it, and B, I didn't want to be where I was. I was in two minds. The horse was definitely in two minds. especially when he saw the taxis. From 5 strides out, I was still in front, and I could feel him putting the brakes on, and he didn't even clear the hedge. He flopped through it and then landed with his nose on the lip of the ditch, and I basically ran down his neck and kept running. And the guy, when I went to get my whip, the guy next to me, who'd fallen beside me, a French amateur, was having a proper heart massage because he was out, and his heart obviously stopped, and I thought then, and he ended up being flown to Prague, and he ended up being fine. But I just thought there's better ways of spending Sunday afternoon in October.
Yeah, you preferred the Grand National than the card.
A bit more lucky, and that was nice.
Yeah. So all these experiences, and you were already writing as a journalist when you won the Grand National. So that was always on the cards. Do you think all these rich experiences help you with your writing?
Oh yeah, they've got to, haven't they?
Yeah,
absolutely. I went to Cirencester as well, so I had 3 years there. So I have a vague idea what's going on in the countryside and in farming, and I still try and keep sort of in touch without actually doing anything in it.
Is a write harder than being a jockey, or easier?
No, I think it's probably easier.
Is it?
I don't know if it's safer. I don't know if I was a natural to start with, but it sort of feels natural now because I've been doing it for so long. It is what I do, really.
Writing is quite a solitary activity.
Yeah, yes. So Saturday, there's the big Group 1 race, the Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee Stakes, which was won by Cardam, who's a bit of a character, good story to write, because everyone sort of thinks he thinks he's a dog, really, but he's won 1.7 million pounds in prize money, and won that race twice, which nothing's done for about 60-70 years. That was a good story. I mean, I even said in my preview, Cardam was about as reliable as Boris Johnson, so I fell for it as well, I'm afraid. Then there was a terrific story with Callum Shepherd winning the Hardwick Stakes, and him having been jocked off in the Derby off Ambient Friendly, who was second for no good reason. So that was a good story. So there's a bit of collusion about which is the better story. So my guys was very flexible at the Telegraph, and we ended up doing the 2 stories separately rather than, so they both got a headline, they both deserved a headline, both those horses. So that was how it was resolved. But I would have said to some of my colleagues, what do you think we should be leading on here? And we didn't. There wasn't sort of consensus on it particularly. I mean, I think different people chose different ways, but yeah, we do talk. I mean, there's a dwindling number of newspaper racing writers now. We are a dangerous breed. The Times doesn't even have a racing correspondent now. So, I mean, Bruff Scott, who's 80 plus, sat next to me during the whole of Royal Ascot, but they don't have a racing correspondent for the rest of the time.
Are you a free agent as to what you choose to write about? I mean, there's lots of articles you have to react to.
Sort of, going to for the Derby, there was a couple of things that stood out to me. One was Bill Gredley, who owned Ambient Friendly, because I actually, I've known him a long time, but I've never actually gone and interviewed him. So I felt like I didn't really know him. And so that was a good opportunity to go and see him. And for Ascot, Gemma Tutty is doing really well in the north, in Yorkshire. And she had it was favourite at the time. It actually ended up being like 18-1 and finishing second. So I went and saw her, and it's just, I think, a slightly wider world should know about Gemma Tutty, because she's doing very well. She's only been doing it for 3 years, had a good story behind her, trains in a beautiful place, clearly knows what she's doing. But, I don't get, when I used to have a column, I could write about people like that, on a weekly basis. But my last sports editor but one got rid of all columns. So I don't have that racing column, which used to be quite light-hearted. And
you write for
I don't have that.
You write for the Daily Telegraph and the Horse and Hound.
No, I don't write for the Horse and Hound anymore.
Okay, right. What I'm asking really is, are you given a free hand to write?
So I didn't answer your question. Pretty much. I mean, yes, a lot of it's reactive, and but yes, if I felt strongly enough about something, I could write it, or someone, wanting to interview someone. But that you have to have. I can't just go and interview Joe Bloggs because there needs to be some sort of hook to hang it on, if you know what I mean.
So, for instance, the horses that got loose in London, the Household Cavalry horses, you wrote an article on that. And that's something you have to react to immediately with a deadline. And how do you start your sort of research for writing an article to sort of give people an overview?
Well, that was just mainly off the top of my head. I think I rang a vet who does equine behaviour. And I mean, you could write that just about why horses get loose, and but they wanted it pretty quick. Sad for racing, but that would probably be my most widely read article this year. I expect, because it was given the full sort of treatment by the Telegraph, who wanted to get it up online because it was quite a big story at the time, and the horses nearly galloped into the foyer at the Telegraph. Yeah, I mean, when I saw the sort of headline that it had just happened flashed up on my phone, I thought, I expect that powers that be at the Telegraph will be giving me a ring fairly soon. And sure enough, about 10 minutes later, they did.
And what sort of deadline do you have to meet? I mean, does that bother you that you have to sort of you're under?
Well, no, I mean, I'm useless without a deadline, but that is get it out as quick as you can, because it's online now. It's not for tomorrow anymore.
Exactly.
They're not really bothered about tomorrow's newspaper. They're more bothered about today online. Get it up as quick and as fast as possible.
And do you enjoy the sort of fun articles? I like the article you wrote about the first time Royal Ascot goers, when you wrote about the do's and don'ts. Is that something you enjoy as well? Because it was a good article. I enjoyed it.
Which one was that? For the Scribe Hound?
Yes.
No? Well, it was just a guide to Royal Ascot. Yeah, no, I love the light-hearted stuff. That's my main probably strength. I don't know. There
are lots of other mediums now, podcasts and interviewing, and it's not just writing, is it? Is that something you do engage in all of those happily now?
No, absolutely not. Just writing. I'm not interested in television. Everyone says, why don't you do television? Not interested. Don't have the concentration. I just like sitting down and writing. And I mean, I wouldn't, if I don't have a deadline, I'm not very good. I mean, I wouldn't just sit down and write because I felt like it. I sort of need to have something to write about, or for someone. I wouldn't just go and write an essay and keep it on my computer and never show it to anyone.
My view is that jockeys in general are very good at speaking and interviews, and I just wondered whether you agreed with me on this. That
I think you're right. I think they're better than some other sports. They do get a bit of training now, but for example, at the weekend, Callum Shepherd spoke so eloquently about what it's like to be jocked off a horse before the Derby. That's maybe the biggest in his life before. I mean, it ran a good race in second, but it was clearly second best. And Callum Shepherd, Frankie Dettori, Lester Piggott wouldn't have made it win, but it's still, he just summed it up very beautifully, but very eloquently and with no chippiness, and So when I was riding, I got really worked up about being jocked off certain horses, sometimes not even very good ones if you'd won on them the time before, and it happens a lot more on the flat because people just do, they don't mind so much. But he didn't say this is two. There was absolutely no this is two fingers up to the Gredleys or anything like that after he won on Isle of Jura the other day. He was just really magnanimous about it, and he will have earned a lot of friends through that.
That came over in your article. Marcus, I feel I have to move you on now to the quick fire questions. Because we're running out of time. A rising star jockey today?
Billy Loughnane on the flat, definitely. Not sure about jumps.
Well, sadly, we did run out of time as we got cut off right at the end. But I would like to thank Marcus once again for his time, which I thoroughly enjoyed. He comes to this part of North Wales every year for the Grand National Meeting, and it's here I'm going to leave him with Mr. Frisk. Until next time, when it could be you in the driving seat.
Written by Marcus Armytage. Then comes Renus and Durham Edition. In third is a long gap then to Brown, Windsor and Suggestion. Last of the Brownies, who's been making steady progress. They're coming down to the second last now. Mr. Frisk lands in the lead. Durham Edition jumps in second. He's been second before. They're racing to the final fence now. And it's Marcus Armytage from Chris Grant. It's Mr. Frisk from Durham Edition. Mr. Frisk lands 2 lengths clear of Durham Edition, but Durham Edition is making ground